Today we're going to be rebuilding the forks on our Honda CRF110, but this process is going to apply to pretty much any of the Honda Play bikes that have these right side up forks. So if your forks look like these, you should be good. You're going to have slightly different specs from bike to bike, so make sure you check your manual no matter what you're working on. And you can see we've got some oil leaking out of these seals. That's how you know this job needs to be done. So with all that said, let's go ahead and get started. We have our Tusk fork and dust seal kit. You're also going to need some oil. 10 weight is standard, but if you're a full-grown adult riding this bike, you probably want to go with some 20 weight. We've got options in between as well. Now, we are also going to be installing some OEM parts. This stuff is not absolutely necessary, but it's nice to have. So we've got the copper washers at the bottom, the O-rings for the fork cap, and then we also have the retaining clips. You're also going to want to have some suspension clean, and if you need any of this stuff, you can find it on our website or just click that link in the description below. To get this done, you're going to need some common hand tools. Now there's some things that are nice to have and then other things you need to have. So we're just going to talk about the things you must have. So a seal driver, this is a universal one from Tusk. I recommend using some safety wire along with that. You also need a vise with some soft jaws or a dedicated suspension vise. Either one will work great. You want a drain pan, and you need a way to measure the new oil going in. So this is that measuring cup from Tusk. We're also using a little bit of Loctite and some seal grease. Other than that, you're going to want some safety glasses, rubber gloves, and some rags. To start out, before we remove the forks from the bike, there's a couple things you want to loosen up. Number one, you've got a center bolt right on the bottom. I've got a 6mm Allen socket. We're just going to crack this loose. We don't want to dump oil everywhere. And then I'm going to loosen the top pinch bolt on each side of the triple clamp. So we're just using a 12mm socket right there. And I've got a 17mm combo wrench, and I'm going to loosen up the fork cap. Then from here, we're going to free up the brake line and remove the wheel. We're using 10 and 19mm sockets and a 14mm combo wrench. Then we're just going to slide the brakes out of the side. And then from here, all you have to do is loosen up that lower pinch bolt on each side and remove the forks. With the forks over at the bench, I'm using suspension clean to get all the grime off these forks before we start working on them. Now, before we take these apart, I want to find out why these fork seals are leaking. So there's two common things that can ruin the seal. One is going to be a nick on this tube if a rock came up and hit it or whatever, and sometimes you'll just see rust marks. So if you have very minor damage on here, a lot of times you can use just a little file and clean the nick up. You can also use emery cloth or 400 to 600 grit sandpaper or even maroon Scotch-Brite. This one's looking pretty good, but if you're not sure if you have damage or not, you can run your finger across whatever you think you see. And if your fingernail catches on anything, then you definitely want to get it cleaned up. If you don't see any visible damage, odds are you probably got some dirt or sand down in the seal and they just need to be replaced. The last thing that I want to talk about is it is possible if you have a lot of hours on your bike, your bushings could be worn out. So you want to pay attention to those while you're in there. You're going to want to have soft jaws in a vise to get this disassembled. I'm just going to clamp that upper tube. And I'm going to use my 17mm wrench and remove the fork cap. Keep in mind it's under spring tension, so it might be a good idea to kind of press down as you unscrew that. Now it's going to come straight up just like that. Pull this off. And we have the spacer in here we need to pull out. And you're going to have a spring seat, so there's a little washer on top of your spring. You're going to have to pay attention to that when you dump this oil out. And I'll just put my finger over the end so I don't lose those parts. You can pump this up and down. That's going to help some of that fluid drain out. Then right here I can go ahead, you can see I've got that washer on the end, or spring seat. Pull out the spring. And then you can leave the fork upside down for a little while and let it drain. And as you pull this out, notice that the tighter coils, they were going to the bottom of the fork. Now I'm taking the fork back to the vise. I've got a drain pan underneath. I'm going to clamp that outer tube in there. Next, we can remove that center bolt. And again, we already loosened this up, but if for some reason this just keeps rotating, one thing you can do, if you don't want to buy a special tool, just take your spring, slide that back in temporarily, install the spacer, just put a little pressure on them. That'll help you remove that bolt. We've got that crush washer on the bottom. So from here we can pull that spacer back out, remove the spring, and be careful with this. I'm tipping this back level because the damping rod will come out now. So it should come out with the top out spring as well. Just like that. I'm gonna tip this back up. I'm gonna take a little flat blade screwdriver, gonna pop this dust seal up. Next we have that retaining clip down in there. I've got a clip tool. You can use a screwdriver or even a pick. But what you want to do is pop this up and we can just pull these off all the way. And then from here, this is going to pull straight out. So that pulls right through. And then down in the bottom, there's going to be a little bottoming cone. So I'm going to tip this upside down. Got that drain pan underneath. So there's that bottoming cone. Then from here, you can use a seal puller, but I like to use a tire spoon. You want to avoid anything digging into this tube when you're prying it up. So I'm just pulling that up just like that. And then on this seal, we've got a garter spring on the top and on the bottom. So again, pay attention. This open side, that's going to be facing down. Okay, and just below that, you've got a washer and a bushing. Then from here, you want to clean everything up. You can see we have a ton of rust and other buildup in there. So just make sure you use some of that suspension clean and get all of your parts cleaned up. So next we need to inspect our parts. And there's some things we're obviously not reusing. So the old seals, we can throw those out. We opted to go with a new retaining clip. You don't have to do that, but if you have rust or anything like that, or if you over collapse that, then you would want to replace it. Then up here we have this crush washer. We're putting a new one on. And then this O-ring on the cap, if that's flattened out or torn or cut, you definitely want to get it replaced. Put that crush washer on our center bolt. Now for the damping rod, we want to inspect this, look at that band at the top, make sure it's not broken, make sure these orifices are not clogged. That's looking good. Top out spring, that's looking fine. Again, if it's broken or something like that, replace it. Now for the bushing, you're just going to tip that up. Look on the inside diameter, there's a Teflon coating, and if that's worn through at any point, you want to get this replaced. Now for the spring, make sure it's not cracked or broken. For the 2019 and newer models, the standard length is 268 millimeters. The limit is going to be 263. 2018 and older bikes, 278 is the standard measurement. The limit, or the shortest it can be, is 272. If you're outside of those specs, get it replaced. I'll take this bushing. I'm going to slide this in place right here. I'm going to take this inner tube and I'm just going to run these all the way up and down, and you just want to make sure they don't bind. So this is feeling great. I can pull that back out, and if this tube does bind when you're sliding it up and down, it means that it's bent and needs to be replaced. So as long as everything is looking good, we can go ahead and start with assembly. Now to get this assembled, I'm going to start with the inner tube in the vise, and I'm going to take my top out spring, I'm going to put it on my damper, and right at the top, we want a little fork oil on that band right there. Then we're going to slide that into that tube. And we're going to help set that in place with the spring. I've got the spacer. Then we're going to have to line it up at the bottom. Now at the bottom, that's where the bottoming cone goes. And I don't want to get grease up in these threads right here, so I'm applying a little grease right there. That's going to hold the anti-bottoming cone in place. Then from here you want to lube up that inner tube. After that we can lube up our bushing, Get oil on both sides of it. Set that in place, push it down. If you need that washer to help get that all the way in there, you can use that. I'm gonna put my finger on that spacer so the damping rod doesn't get pushed up. And as you slide this on, as soon as it bottoms, you're probably not lined up with that bottoming cone. So you're gonna need a pick or small screwdriver. Reach down in there, line it up, and that's gonna pop on the rest of the way. So with that lined up, I'm gonna push the whole assembly up. So now we don't have to worry about that cone moving around on us. From here, we've got just some low strength thread lock on the center bolt. We're gonna thread this in. So once you have that started, you can clamp the lower tube in the vise. Then you can press down on that spacer. You can try to tighten that up, and if it does start to tighten, you can torque it, but most of the time, you're just gonna get that snug enough to where you can finish the assembly, and you'll do the final torque as soon as the rest of the fork is together. And from here, you wanna remove your spacer and that spring, and then set the fork upright. So now we've got that backup ring. Slide that down. Then we have our seal. So these seals, they do come with some grease. I'm just gonna spread that out, make sure that all these lips have lubricant on them. And you can see, if you look down in there, you can see the double side of the seal, the double lip side of the seal, that's gonna face the oil. The side with a single lip, that's gonna be facing the outside. But again, open side facing down, closed side facing up. Now to drive this fork seal in place, we're gonna use our Tusk universal fork seal driver. So you can use a screwdriver, and you wanna adjust these pieces so they're evenly spaced. And once you have them where you want them, tighten the screw. And then there are some tricks to the trade when you use this. So one thing we're gonna do to help us out is use a little safety wire across the front. That's gonna hold this tight against the tube and in place. Now last thing before I drive that in place, I'm gonna use a heat gun. Heat up this outer tube. That's gonna help the seal pop right into place. And we've got a little fork oil on the two halves of the driver. Slide those on top, and then we're gonna slide this into place. Then you just wanna verify that the seal is driven all the way down. So once we look in there, we wanna be able to see that groove for the retaining clip. Next, install the retaining clip. You just wanna make sure that's all the way down in its groove. Then for the dust seal, I'm gonna apply some seal grease to it. Got it on the lips and on that outer diameter. Help it pop in place. Slide that down. You should be able to push it all the way down, but if you need a soft face mallet, you can hit that in the rest of the way. Next, we're gonna fill the fork up with oil, and the 2019 and newer bikes are gonna be 173 milliliters of oil. Again, we're going with a 20 weight, but standard is 10. If your bike is 2018 or older, that's gonna be 179 milliliters. And then we're gonna pump that inner tube up and down a couple times to get the oil dispersed. And then you wanna let that settle for a few minutes, let any air bubbles come to the top. Now, if you wanna get real precise, you can use an oil level height tool. This one is from Tusk, and the newer bikes, 2019 and newer, you're gonna set the oil level height at 115 millimeters. The older bikes, 2018 and older, that's gonna be 96 millimeters. Set this in the top, we'll have the fork collapsed, and then we'll pull out any excess oil. So just that measurement, we barely pulled out any oil. So measuring it out worked out pretty dang good. Next, we're gonna install our spring. Tighter coils are going to the bottom. And then we've got that washer, spacer, and finally we have the cap. So when you install the cap, make sure you have some oil on that O-ring. We can just slide this inner tube up to it. I'm gonna thread all of this together. We'll just snug that up for now. If you want to torque that on the bike, the torque is 16 foot-pounds. But from here, what we can do is do the final torque on the bottom. So again, that center bolt is going to get torqued to 15 foot-pounds, and I'm going to press down on this fork tube, and that's going to put tension on the damping rod so we can torque that bolt. So that's it for this fork leg. We're going to do the same steps on the other one and then bring them over to the bike. Now to install these on the bike, we're just going to make sure we have any grease wiped off our fork tube, clean up the triple clamps, and then we're just putting the top of the fork tube flush with our upper triple clamp. Once you have that there, you can go ahead and tighten the lower triple clamp. Now I'm going to tighten up the fork cap, and again, this is 16 foot-pounds. Tighten this upper triple clamp. Do the same thing for the other fork. Now we can torque the lower pinch bolts to 24 foot-pounds and the uppers to 16. Next we'll install the wheel spacer. Then we've got our drum brakes. We'll slide those in. Make sure you have this lined up on the side. There's a little tab in the fork. Slide the axle in and torque the axle nut to 44 foot-pounds. Last, we've got our brake line retainer. That's how you rebuild the forks on your Honda CRF110 or Honda Play bike. If you have any questions about the process, leave those down in the comments. And if you need any parts for your bike, you can find those on our website. We offer free shipping on orders over $75. So take advantage of that. If you want to see more helpful content like this for your bike, you're going to want to subscribe to our channel. I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Thanks for watching.